whoever you are and whenever you are, welcome good souls of the planet and beyond to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight, joining us is Tui Snider. And, well, we are going to be talking about the paranormal of Texas and beyond. And Tui has really covered it all, everything from aliens to cryptids to ghosts. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a fun night tonight. So hang in there for just a little bit. She's coming up shortly. Share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook, facebook.com/paranormalnowradio, Instagram @paranormalnow, Twitter @paranormal_now. And of course, please join us in the KGRA chat room. In the news, John Greenwald of the Black Vault, he is on a roll lately. It's really, really impressive. First, with a letter from the Navy, wherein the U.S. Navy confirmed that the 3 Navy videos that were released, including the famous Tic-Tac-Toe UFO, Tic-Tac UFO that is, are the real deal, calling them, quote, unexplained aerial phenomena, and that the videos were never actually permitted for release, which is really interesting. Because there have been claims out there that permission was given, not that any laws have been broken, to my understanding. So we'll see how this plays out. Now, Greenwald has received recently declassified documents from the FBI on persons and investigations, such as Sylvia Brown, George Adamski, animal and cattle mutilations, Edward Condon, Bill Cooper, Stanton Friedman, and a lot more. So you can find the link to that on the Paranormal Now Facebook page, or you can just go directly to theblackvault.com, and it's right at the top of the page. There are so many personalities and cases there. It's I haven't gotten a chance to get to most of them. It's going to take some time to go through that. So I'd like to hear what you have to say if you find anything that really pops and is very interesting to you. In the other news, I'm very happy. Thank you, everyone, for getting those likes and subscriptions on the YouTube channel. We are currently at 91, so we are 9 subscriptions short from hitting our 100 subscription goal. The past week, those numbers have jumped dramatically, thanks to you all, thanks to sharing the pages and the videos of Coffee and UFOs, the new series on the Paranormal Pop YouTube channel, and thanks, of course, to Michael 8 from Septembria. I know he's done a lot of work trying to get awareness about the channel as well. So it'll be really helpful. Once we can get the URL, it'll be easier to share and promote, and hopefully we'll spend more time hanging out talking about the stuff that we love to talk about here on Paranormal Now. Call-ins are now available to all of you as we roll out the new HD toll-free phone line sponsored by the Paranormal Radio app. So add this number to your mobile phone so you can call us hands-free. It is 85-KGRA live. That's 855-472-5483. Call in, listen to your cue, pose your question to the guest or myself, and make sure to save the Paranormal Radio app hotline number, 85-KGRA live. Besides, it's so much easier to just talk than have to type on a little keyboard. Tonight's guest, Tui Snider, is an award-winning writer, speaker, photographer, and musician specializing in offbeat sites, overlooked history, cemetery, symbolism, and haunted lore. As she puts it, I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas. Tui lectures frequently at universities, libraries, conferences, and bookstores. This fall, she will speak about the Great Airship Mystery of 1897, a location that I was recently visiting when I was visiting Ken Cherry out in Texas. So we'll get to that. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say in regard to that supposed, alleged alien crash and alleged buried alien body. She's also at this year's UFO Congress and teaches a course on understanding cemetery symbols at Texas Christian University. She also shares weekly info videos based on her research at our YouTube channel. Snider's writing and photography have been featured in a variety of media outlets, including WFAA TV, Coast to Coast AM, LifeHack, Langdon Review, The City of Plano, Wild Woman Walking, Shades of Angels, and many more. She has several more books in progress, and her website is tuisnider.com. Tui, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Well, hey, Alan. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on your show.
I am excited. You cover the gamut for sure. So before we dive into the many subjects that are weird Texas, how did you get drawn in to the weird stuff in the first place?
Looking back, it seems that I've kind of been drawn to the weird side of things my whole life. And if you'd asked me when I was a kid what my least favorite topic was at school, I would have said history. Because to me, it just seemed like all you ever learned was this battle, that battle, and I'm not really into war history. I kind of want to know the quirky day-to-day aspect. So I was going through some boxes not that long ago, and I found a old report I'd written about the founding fathers. But I mentioned that Paul Revere had a pet squirrel, and that he was a silversmith, and he made his little squirrel a pet collar, and things like that. I mentioned Benjamin Franklin's essay about farting, and that he used to like to take moon baths in the nude. And my teacher was like, very interesting, not what I was looking for, but
Or no,
so
that's for sure.
I realized, okay, so I've always been interested in sort of the quirky.
Right. And the quirky very easily slips into the weird, because I think a lot of us that are paranormal oriented are a little quirky in our own rights. We have interests that are peculiar, odd, and I think that has to be some reflection of our personalities, right?
I do. And I think that the eccentric people you meet are the ones who are more brave about coming forward. I mean, now people in my lifetime, I've seen more and more people come out and talk about some sort of paranormal encounter they've had. But when I was growing up, it was really mostly the more eccentric people, the people who really just, hey, I marched to my own drummer. This is what I experienced, who seemed willing to come forward and just say, this is what I experienced. It was strange. And then on top of it, I did grow up in a house where there was some inexplicable things happening. And being the youngest, I've really tried hard to make sure that people knew that it wasn't just my imagination. And of course, it didn't work. But.
Well, and also I would say that paranormal-oriented people have imagination.
Yeah, so that would be the thing my parents would say. So it didn't help that my brother and sister are like 7 and 10 years older than me. So, it looked to them when I was saying that I would hear weird things in our house. And it was a very strange sound. It would sound like, and it would wait till, I was alone in the afternoon and they were at the grocery store or something. I mean, this could be 3 in the afternoon. It was not like at the witching hour. And suddenly I would hear in our guest room downstairs, it would sound like someone jumping on the bed. And, when you're a little kid, you know exactly what it sounds like to be jumping on the bed. It's something you want to, you're always told not to do it. So the first few times it happened, I was too scared to do anything. And I told my family when they got home, and they went in there and they're like, everything looks fine. What are you talking about? They'd take me in there, and then they'd pat me on the head and just say, oh, what a big imagination you have. And I'd be like, maybe, but that is not what's going on. So because of that, I ended up going to the library, and that's when I first met reference librarians and learned how wonderful they can be. And they, led me over to the adult section and showed me all this great, wonderful paranormal section. And I started reading about reincarnation, and I started doing yoga, and I started just anything I could find in that section. I just read it. And I'm really grateful. I never did figure out what was going on in our house, but I do feel grateful that it happened, because I feel like it really opened my mind. It kept my mind open to, hey, there is more to this world than what we're told. There's certainly things that can't be explained yet.
Right. And in regard to your childhood too, I was recently speaking with a friend, Camille Atkinson, on Coffee and UFOs, and then previous to that, Kevin D. Randall on a Paranormal Now episode, and we discussed memory. And the argument was continually made that our memory isn't as good as we think it is. Do you feel when you're investigating cases that could be problematic, people's recall? Yes, I've even experienced that in my life. Now, as a writer, I am a compulsive note taker, and I read Anne Frank's diary when I was a kid, and I was so inspired that I started keeping a diary. And,
not, I'm a little more sporadic than Anne Frank, but I have found it really helpful for going back to things. Like, just getting to my own experience, I had an experience with where we saw something in the sky that was unusual. This was in my early 20s, and I was at a party, and a bunch of us were standing out on the back deck. It was up in Washington State. It was a really clear, beautiful night. Up in Washington State, sometimes you can actually see the northern lights. It can be really beautiful. So it was a very crisp night. We could really see the stars. And our friend who was there, he had been a navigator on like a KC-135 in the Air Force. And so he really had knowledge of the sky. So he was telling us, there's the Big Dipper, and then follow the arc to Arcturus, and pointing out the stars and really walking us through the sky. All of a sudden, this light kind of caught our eyes, and it was in the distance, and I think we just all fell quiet. We were watching it move kind of from left to right, and I think we were asking, hey, Chan, is that what is that? Or is that a satellite? What are we watching? And all of a sudden, it just, at a right angle, it shot straight up into the sky, and we all gasped. And my friend, who was from, had been in the Air Force, was really freaked out, and it was all we could talk about for the rest of the night. We were all like, what was that? And he really hesitated to say the word UFO, but I think he might have said anomalous or, strange, nothing, no known craft. I'm going on and on about this because a couple months later, I was at another gathering, bumped into him again, and mentioned, hey, maybe if we all go out and look at the stars, maybe we'll see another UFO. And he goes, what UFO? And he had absolutely no memory of the incident. And it was so upsetting to me that I went home, and it was pretty late. I dug through my diary, flipped back a couple months, and I found a little account that I'd written of it. And so the moral of that story to me, I tell people, no matter what you do, if you have a strange experience in the afternoon randomly, or if you go on an official ghost hunt, or just whatever, have a little notebook where you write this stuff down. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but have a notebook where you keep track of these experiences, because I think if you don't tell your mind that it's important enough to write down, and I think I have read some research along these lines too, where, the act of writing something down kind of tells your mind that it's important. You will lose things. You might lose the incident entirely, or you might just lose the important bits and not be able to describe it very well. So, and circling back to what you originally asked, yeah, I do worry about that with people, and that is kind of my soapbox thing. I'm constantly giving people notebooks, handing out notebooks, telling people to write things down.
Well, when people are in traumatic situations or shock, the brain is designed for survival mode. And so it's hyper-focused on the immediate and what it needs to do.
Yeah. Which
means other things in the peripheral can get lost. And for me, I like what you said. When I saw my UFO, I was about 12. I had a very similar experience, where it was like a satellite moving in the air back and forth, and then it took off like a meteor in reverse.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, what's going on here? But now it's interesting that a pilot was more shocked by it than you, which actually makes sense because they know. Was he a pilot?
He was a navigator.
Okay.
On a KC-135, a refueling. Well, it doesn't matter, but anyway, on an Air Force plane. Yeah, he was an official military navigator, so he knew the sky.
So he knew that he knew the sky, and I think that's shocking to him. Why would he not remember? Is it something that it's because it was scary? He's like, I don't want to think about that, and then that's it. It's gone.
I think my theory, and I don't know, I just called it, and I've called it this for a long time, I call it the weird box, because I had another experience, but this wasn't a UFO. It was with some coworkers, and me and a couple coworkers had to stay late one night, and we worked in an office that was it was a dental office, but it was also it was an old house, so it had been zoned commercial. So this old house, and so like when you filed stuff, you went down into this creepy basement. But we were upstairs doing some stuff. And I kept hearing I would hear, it would sound like a man's voice in my ear. Like I was just focused on my, who needs to get their teeth cleaned, and I'm doing some just, work like that. All of a sudden I'd hear like Tui in my ear. And I would think, the other person I had there was a gal named Cindy, but I couldn't make sense. But I thought she must be calling me from the other room. Why it would sound like a man talking in my ear. And I've since then I've come across people who've had this happen. Like that's a phenomenon. Hearing your name sort of said in your urgently whispered in your ear is something that I've come across that other people have experienced. But at this time, I didn't know it was a thing, So I go running over, well, not running, kind of trotting over to the room where she was. The door was closed. I just kind of open it up, and she looks at me and she goes, "Did you just call me?" And she's looking freaked out. I go, "No." "Did you just call me?" And she's like, "No." And I said, "Did you just hear a man's voice in your ear say your name?" And she's like, "Yeah." And it happened to us like 3 or 4 more times. We would forget about it just when you'd kind of get back into your work. And we were so on edge by the time we left. I think we raced through the work we had to do. And we talked about it. We rode home together and we talked about it the whole car ride home. And then this is a very similar situation. A couple of months later, we're having like a staff meeting, and I kind of pull her aside and I say, "Gosh, what was that weird? What do you think that was?" And I mentioned the voice, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" She didn't remember it. And once again, I go home, I look at my diary. Luckily, I'd written it down because it would have made me doubt my own memory if I hadn't taken those notes. But I did. So that was the only proof I had that, okay, I'm not making this up. But my thought was that since I've made space in my life since I was a little kid for the weird box, as I called it even back then, for the weird memories, I have my brain allots some sort of space for remembering those things. And
specifically for that purpose.
Yeah, and they do say there's a theory that one reason when we dream during REM sleep, you're doing a lot of cleansing, and a big part of that might be forgetting things that don't matter. So maybe people who don't have that weird box, or whatever you want to call it, I should have come up with something better. But maybe all those things get flushed out of their mind. Meanwhile, my brain's going, "Oh, yeah, we got a spot for this weird memory. We'll just tuck it over here."
Well, I guess you can call it the mystery box.
Oh, I like that. The mystery box. Okay, I'm taking a note. Thank you. That's much better.
I remember when I was there seeing that UFO, and immediately after one of the first thoughts that came to my mind was, I can't forget this. I can't grow up and doubt my child memory. I remember clearly thinking about this. So I don't know where that came from. I might have seen it in a movie, or maybe read a Goosebumps novel or something. I don't know.
And it's good that you thought that at 12. How cool.
Yeah, right. And I remember I can't let this, I have to keep this clear in my head. And I had a witness with me as well. But
good.
That is important, to write something down, or at least share your story immediately and several times, and repeat it enough so that you'll not stray from that original happening as it was. I mean, when you speak to someone like Travis Walton, his story is the same because he's been telling it over and over and over and over and over again for decades. And so he knows that this is what happened, and it doesn't alter. He doesn't add anything to it, and therefore it remains intact.
Yes, definitely. And I think too that we don't give kids enough credence. I think we're very quick to pass them off. Like you at 12, you were thinking, "Hey, I'd better remember this." And me at 10, I was thinking, "Geez, I know how this looks. I'm the little kid. Everyone's going to think I'm making it up." I remember thinking that. That's why I was like, I got to go to the library and find some data to I didn't probably say the word data, but I got to go to the library and find some book to back me up. Because it's like, I was 10 and I realized, yeah, everyone will just think it's me making it up. But I'm like, no. So, yeah. And that is a good point about Travis Walton.
Yep. Have you ever come across a witness who was basically telling you a yarn and kind of reeling you in at all?
Not too often, but I can think of one instance. And I used to actually do insurance transcription, which means that I'd be sitting alone in a room somewhere listening to files from people on both sides of an insurance, like a car crash. And it's really interesting how bad liars people are and how obvious it is. And it really gives you a sense for what people do when they're lying. But I think it was good training in a lot of ways. One thing I've noticed is when people, this person in particular, they told me they'd seen a UFO, and when I asked them for details, they were very hesitant and kind of skittery and didn't really, they hadn't thought it out apparently. Whereas most people, if they've, experienced something, they'll tell you what they're willing to admit, like, I don't really remember this part, but then what I do remember, they're just forthright with, I don't even remember why I was walking this direction or something, or I don't remember when I saw it, if I shut the car off yet or whatever. They'll just go ahead and tell you those little things. But if someone's lying, they don't want to admit the parts that they forgot, because basically they're making the whole thing up.
Well, also, if you're telling the truth and you're telling your story again, and then you say, oh, I also remember whatever. Because you're telling the truth, there's nothing to be afraid of. It's not like you're going to get caught in a lie.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right, so you can just, and if you're wrong or if you're mistaken, then it's not a big deal, because you know that you're telling the truth. You're not going to feel bad about it. Like, oh, was I mistaken? But if you're lying, you're afraid that if you veer from your story, then it will come back to haunt you. It could contradict yourself. Right.
Yeah. Of course, when I'm doing research and I don't have a living person to speak with, I have to look for different indicators to tell whether things are true or not. Right. So, like, when I was researching, and I still am researching the airship sightings from 1897 here in Texas, I was aware that there was a tradition of hoax journalism throughout the 1800s, and it was something kind of a playful thing that newspapers would do. It's not the same thing as fake news. Fake news is, meant to set out something and really mislead you. But hoax journalism are these elaborate stories that start off, and they'd be serials in a regular newspaper, and they'd be presented as if they were true. But they just get wilder and crazier along the way, to the point where you generally, after a while, they come clean, or else the reader realizes, oh, this is ridiculous. And there was one that I really like. It was called the Great Moon Hoax in the 1800s. And it claimed that this guy had created devised such a wonderful telescope that he could see the moon. And there were man bats and fire breathing beavers and all these crazy creatures on it. I
want to see fire-breathing beavers.
I know. It's really something. I told that to someone recently, and they said, well, maybe you've never seen a beaver get mad enough to breathe fire. How do you know?
Right. But you think that would be a kind of a tell right there, though.
Yeah. So you look for the crazy stuff. But it is interesting. Edgar Allan Poe wrote some of these hoax news articles. Mark Twain, of course, was notorious for just bending the truth to make some news. It was considered a thing to do, because the newspapers were meant to inform and entertain, kind of all rolled into one. So.
Sure. Well, it's funny when you come across, I've come across the Onion article.
Oh, yeah.
And people who don't know the Onion take them seriously and react.
Oh my gosh. I know. They'll share it on Facebook and they'll be ready to pick it or something. And you're like, you got to look at the URL. Yeah, we do. That's something we can be aware of these days.
Right. Well, look, everybody likes a good story. And
true.
It's fun telling a good story. With the paranormal, sometimes that line is blurred. It becomes, especially like television programs, it becomes part entertainment, part investigation.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
I don't watch a lot of those now. I don't really know. I got to just, I guess, pretty much say no. I think that I have a lot of thoughts about why paranormal investigations are important. And I think that, there is a lot of boredom involved. There is time where there's time setting up. It takes time. If you're going on a really professional one, there's going to be time to set up equipment. Then there's going to be time where you're sitting there waiting for nothing to happen. I compare it to bird watching. If you want to see a roadrunner in my backyard, I do get them every now and then. They're really cool, but you have to be quiet. You have to be patient. And there's no guarantee you're going to see a roadrunner. And so I don't think that comes across, because TV is a different medium. They're not brave enough to just say, okay, we sat around for 4 hours and not a lot happened. But that's the nature of true research. So I don't know.
Well, I'll ask you further on that question of why is the paranormal, or why are paranormal investigations important in the first place? Because we've gotten along thousands and thousands and thousands of years not knowing the answers. Why are they important? We'll get the answer from Tui on the other side of this break. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Once again, this is going to be another great night. So many more topics and stories, especially the Great Airship Mystery of 1897 coming up. We'll be right back.
Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRARadio.com.
Lost in a bad way, cost me my family. Chaos around me, can't hear my heart say, hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. That's the wrong way. You're lost in a bad way, starting to let go.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host tonight. Okay, so it looks like coming soon there may be a class action lawsuit in regard to the UFO monument. So I know the people who listen to this show have their eyes peeled on that page on Facebook and are know Tom Reed and keep up with the updates. But I will try to keep you updated as I find out more. This is crazy. This is really out of control. And I'm not saying this in a judgmental way at all, except towards those that, I mean, why would you make such a big deal about this monument and attack those who curated it, cared for it? It's very odd. Especially for a small town. I really don't understand what the motive is there. So again, I'll try not to comment too much because I don't really understand the side of the story that says there shouldn't be a UFO monument here. So until I can get more information, I'll refrain from any commentary on that for the most part. But it just strikes me as very odd. So we'll keep you updated with that potential lawsuit that seems to be coming. Okay, so into happier news. Tonight's guest is Tui Snider, and we have a lot to talk about. Tui, why is the paranormal so important? Why investigating why is it so important?
Well, I have a couple reasons that I think that it's important to engage in paranormal research. First of all, we live in such a noisy world. We've got so much, not just the noise around you, but the noise, digital noise. We get a lot of input all day long. We get 24-hour news cycle. There's constant information bombarding us. And so when you do go on a true paranormal investigation, it forces you to be mindful. And I know when people hear mindfulness and everyone goes, yes, I should be more mindful. I should be meditating more. I should be, and they think mindfulness kind of means you're just sitting there doing some sort of hand gesture and not moving. But you can be mindful. Yeah, I think that participating in a ghost hunt, if that's something that interests you, is a good way to be mindful. It can be other things too. Like I said, I love birds. So bird watching and paranormal investigations, I see a lot in common between the two. But to get the most out of it when you are in a paranormal investigation, you need to be quiet. You need to be aware of your immediate surroundings. You can't be looking at your phone, scrolling Instagram, liking photos. You got to be quiet and paying attention. Wow, did I just feel a cold spot? Let me see if the temperature went down. Gosh, did I just hear something in the next room? Well, you're really using your ears, so it makes you use all of your senses. And then you can use a few gizmos to I really love getting an EVP, so I'm a sucker for using a digital recorder. But I think there's a real benefit to that if it's just slowing you down and making you pay attention. Plus, you also, part of that is learning the history of that building. It makes you engage in your own town. If there's a haunted hotel in your hometown, you might go to the library, do some information, find out this crazy tale about a lady who fell down the stairs. So there you have learned history. You've engaged in your surrounding, your local area. Like I do a lot of travel writing, and my slogan is always that even home is a travel destination. I think there's a lot of things that we just walk right by in our life that could be fun or interesting or enriching, but we're so busy scrolling our phone or, looking at a screen or thinking about our next thing. You don't even have to be using a device. So that's the first reason. The second reason I can say much more quickly, I just think that it's important for us to gather data. And we're learning so much, especially if you follow quantum physics at all, about the nature of the universe. We're learning just some strange things about how the world works. Maybe if we continue to gather actual data at haunted sites, we can start to make some sense of it and figure out what causes it and what it's all about.
Right. But if we don't find out, do you think we'll just get on okay? Or do you think actually understanding the paranormal might be a key to something bigger?
Well, I think we all wonder, why are we here? What happens next? So people ask me a lot of times, do you believe in ghosts? And I dislike that question because define ghost. Do I know that just because I heard a voice that sounds just like my Uncle Ben calling from the next room, was that really him from the beyond? Or even if I catch it on tape, do I know what that is? So I'm not sure, but I think if we could, I think it would be really great. It would help us to understand more about why we're here. And then if we can understand why, the big eternal questions of why are we alive? What happens when we die? I think that could make us better people. That would be my hope.
What is happening in Texas that makes it so paranormal?
It's funny. I have lived all over the world. I've been really lucky, and I've gotten to travel a lot. And I growing up, I lived in Virginia and Montana and Washington State, and I lived in Belgium and Italy, and I've gotten to spend a lot of time in England. And so I've been a lot of places in the world, and I can't say that, people always ask me, is Texas more haunted than other places? And I really can't say. I mean, I don't have a special Geiger counter that's like a hauntometer that goes off and can measure how haunted places are. I wish I did. But I do notice that Texans can tell a really good ghost story. And I think part of the reason for this is that when the Texans I meet tend to know more about their regional history. Like they in their schools, they learn a lot more state history than I learned growing up. I think we had one quarter of it, of Washington state history, when I was going to high school up there. But here in Texas, the people I've met, they learn Texas history all throughout school. So for some reason, I think history and ghost stories kind of go hand in hand, because a good ghost story is really just really juicy history that then hopefully there's some lasting phenomenon from it. But I don't know what it is. Texans seem to be natural born storytellers, and they seem to have a respect for ghost stories that I haven't bumped into other places I've lived in the world.
Okay, so the Great Airship Mystery of 1897 and the Aurora crash. Do you think that something actually crashed there? Or is that just one of the stories you were describing to us in newspapers at the time?
I thought it was really ridiculous at first. And that's happened to me so often in Texas. There's been a lot of things that I thought were pretty ridiculous. And then once I started doing some research, I found it to be more and more compelling. So, and I do like to say this. I mean, I'm not someone who claims to be unbiased when I go in to do research. I can't help it. I kind of thinking. I love it when my research proves me wrong, but I do have ideas at first. And this one, I just thought, oh, how ridiculous. There's nothing to it. But then when I started digging into some newspaper archives, this was like 7 years ago now, I just couldn't stop reading, because there were hundreds of airship sightings reported in the papers during specifically a 6-week period in particular in North Texas. And sometimes I would find, I've sat there and I put into Google Maps the ones that April 16th, it was seen here, here, and here at this time and this time, and kind of looked at it obviously I don't have airship. I just have to put in as if it were a car in Google Maps, and I've looked and tried to see. So I do think something was in the skies during that time. What it was, I really cannot say. it does seem like there is quite a bit of evidence that maybe something did crash there, that there was an explosion. People have found metal embedded in the trees in the area of the crash site.
Mm-hmm.
I think, people often say, well, how did it get brushed aside? How did it, people didn't really talk about it much for a long time. But one example I like to give is that, have you heard of those incendiary balloons that the Japanese sent over across the Pacific during World War II?
Uh-huh.
And yeah, some of them landed in Oregon and Washington. So I was kind of aware of them from that. But there was one that made it all the way to a little town in Texas, I think Woodson, Texas. And I went to Woodson, Texas, and I walked around and asked people about it. And this was, just a couple of years ago. And they were like, what are you talking about? I never heard about that. That actually happened. Now, it wasn't declassified until the 50s or 60s. I have an article, I forget, buried somewhere about it. But I like to say that, if something like that I know happened for sure. We know that there was a balloon bomb that it landed and exploded, in fact. So it, created a pretty, you can compare that to the airship, 60 years earlier or 50 years earlier. So I do see how a big event like an explosion could be forgotten by the locals. So that in and of itself doesn't make me go, well, it's obviously not true. Another thing people say is, well, why did they bury the creature rather than dissect it or give it to science? Well,
that's the thing. How do they even misconstrue a human being, right? So either it was totally fabricated that it's an alien being, or they saw something that literally was clearly not a human being.
Well, they describe it in the article. They say that that there were some charred remains of the pilot of the ship,
right,
the airship, and that enough of it remained to say that it was not of this world. And when they have done ground penetrating radar there, it does seem to be a child-sized coffin. And back then, you would not have had, CSI Aurora. You would not have had forensics. And the whole idea of doing an autopsy was considered very disrespectful and sacrilegious in many ways. People, that was a real problem for the medical colleges at the time, because they couldn't get a hold of a corpse to do for anatomy class the way you do now. People will donate their bodies to science. But back then, a lot of people thought literally on Judgment Day they were going to rise up and their body be reanimated. And I've done a lot of cemetery research. And at first I thought this was so weird, but I've got kind of grown used to it. People, if they had like an arm amputated or a leg amputated, they would bury that at the time. So so you'll see like a little headstone. It says, "Here lies the leg of Stringfellow," and it'll be like a nice, a nice monument that costs some money. But he wanted to, when Gabriel blew his horn, he wanted to stand up, grab his leg, and be like, "I'm ready." So for them the people of 1897 to bury a creature immediately, that made sense. And it's kind of funny. It's buried in the Masonic section of the cemetery, for what it's worth. But I really tried to get into that 1897 mindset.
Right. Now, the monument that is near the cemetery, the monument is where the crash allegedly took place. Now, there's a big tree in the back of that property that we saw. Is that true that that's the tree that was there when this crash took place?
Yeah. And it's fun. You were here recently. Gosh, I would have come over. I live about 15 minutes away.
Yeah. My idea was about, I think May I was there. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, actually, I think I was traveling then. But still, if you ever come back, let me know.
Okay.
We can meet up there. So there is a beautiful live oak there with a pretty distinctive branch that reaches out. And back in 2012, when I first heard about it, I went and visited, and there was a headstone there that had a little cigar-shaped craft carved into it with 3 portholes on it. And it was stolen later that year. I went back actually like a month or 2 later to get more photos, and it was gone, which is really too bad. But they've got a rock there, and it's in a slightly different spot. Did you see the rock that was covered with pennies and things?
Near the tree?
Yeah.
Or in the cemetery?
In the cemetery. Well, there's a tree in the cemetery. Oh, you were at the crash site?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Well, so that's on private property. You're not talking about the.
Well, no, but you can see it. You can see it from the road there, like the driveway.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Apparently, that tree was the tree that there was a crash there, right?
Yeah. Well, there was a they call it a windmill in the newspaper, but it's actually a windlass, which I'm not too clear on. But it's like it looks sort of like a windmill. It's used for pumping water up. Mm-hmm. And that's what got smashed into and demolished. And there is a well on that property and you can see the foundation of where the windlass was. So, and at one point, and the people said that they threw some of the refuse from the crash into their well. And then later on, these people who lived there said they thought the well water was giving them like arthritis or some sort of gout. And so they covered it up. Mm-hmm. But I think the History Channel went there in maybe 2004 and tested the water. I don't know. There's a lot that really...
They did, yeah. And I was with Ken Cherry recently, and he was on that episode when we went. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so he was the one that was pointing the tree out to me. Mm-hmm. And so my understanding is it hit the windmill and then like clobbered or like chipped, or not chipped, but bumped against the tree. It was like right there. Mm-hmm. But maybe that might just be local lore and not not the case. I don't know.
No, that sounds right. If you're with Ken Cherry, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So, do you think that there actually are bones buried in the cemetery?
It's so frustrating because it happened in 1897 and kind of was forgotten. And then in 1973, Jim Mars and Bill Case both wrote stories about it, and attention just erupted, and people were really interested, and they went there, and they asked the Cemetery Association if they could exhume the body, and they just flat out said no. And then apparently at one point they kind of cheekily said that, well, you need to notify next of kin. Mm-hmm. And then they just stalled, and then they said no, we just don't want to. And they said part of the reason they didn't want to was that there had been an epidemic in Aurora, and this is absolutely true, a really serious epidemic, and I've seen articles about it. Just when I'm researching other things, I'll see it on the page. And it was this horrible disease that would, leave you blind or paralyzed if you managed to survive it. So they were a little concerned about digging it up. Maybe that might spread disease. Not that, how would they know? But I just think that they really should at this point. Of course, I don't know if there is some, when I talked to Jim Mars about it, he thought that back in 1973, the government came and surreptitiously dug it up and maybe removed everything. He had gone there, I think, with Bill, and they had used a metal detector and detected 3 distinct pieces of metal, and I think right below the headstone. And so, they were like, well, that's interesting. And then I think when they went back, they weren't able to detect those metal signatures again. So, and this was, it was guarded. I should say that for a couple of weeks, the local police force guarded the grave 24/7. And then like a couple days after they quit guarding it, people think that it was, that maybe someone came and sneakily made off with whatever was in there. So I don't know if we'll ever know the answer now. I wish they had dug it up back in the 70s. It's very frustrating. Could certainly, I mean, maybe it was just a burnt up raccoon. I mean, I don't know.
But they did detect a cavity underneath.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just like a piece of stone that says something cool on it and they just slapped it in the grass. I mean, there was an actual body that was underneath there, or something was underneath.
Yeah, and it seemed to be smaller, like a child size.
Right, exactly.
So so that's all very fascinating. I don't know, that's what sucked me in. I thought this was just a one-off case. I thought it was just the Aurora incident. So then when I discovered that, or to me it was a discovery. Other people knew this, but I didn't realize there had been so many sightings, and then they just suddenly end. So that was really weird too, to me. It seems like if it were just a joke, it would have trickled off. But yeah, there really aren't any more sightings after June. I think it's the latest one I found.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that when there are flaps or waves, whatever you want to call it, of sightings or any kind of paranormal event, do you think it's just pure coincidental, or do you think that there might be something stirring these events?
Well, I mean, I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt. If I had been part of a flap, had seen something, I would want people to respect what I'm telling them, and at least, they don't have to believe that it's something extraterrestrial, but just to believe that I experienced something. I've always been suspicious of things where they call them, mass hysteria or mass sightings. I've never been involved in one of those. I do, anytime I see a headline along those lines, I do look at them because I'm so curious, like what that means. I mean, what does that mean? How could we influence each other's perceptions to the extent that we would all be seeing a hallucination? Maybe we're all seeing something that we just can't describe. So I don't know in that regard.
Do you think that there is a connection, though, between UFOs or the ghosts or cryptids?
I used to think they were very distinct and very different. But I have to say, I notice more and more crossover. I think there is like a continuum. And I think, I grew up in Washington State where Bigfoot is a pretty big deal. And if you are friends with people who live on Native American reservations, you've probably heard a Bigfoot tale or two. In fact, for show and tell in 6th grade, this one kid brought in a Bigfoot cast. So that was everyone put their things away, and that's what we talked about the whole time. So, but I growing up, I really thought they were all different things. I thought cryptids were one thing. I thought UFOs were another. I thought, ghosty stuff, they were all separate things. But I've come across more and more in the last few years, people talking about crossover between them. And I really don't know. There really does seem to be, with the Bigfoot stories you hear, it doesn't seem like it's a regular creature, the regular creature of the world. And people like Kathleen Marden, I heard an interview, she is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. Mm-hmm. And I heard an interview with her and a gal, Denise Stone, who was saying that quite often they have done lots of interviews of people who have been abductees. And they've got these really extensive questionnaires for abductees to fill out. And I think they ask in there if they've had any sort of paranormal activity. And they said quite often they go hand in hand. Like a person will have a UFO sighting, and then they will start to have some sort of poltergeist activity or some sort of paranormal activity in their house. So there does seem to be some sort of correlation or crossover between the two.
Right. Okay, so I saw this on a Twitter feed, and you had responded to it. That from John Tenney, the idea that perhaps a large number of abductees or experiencers are left-handed. And you had asked Kathleen Marden about this, apparently.
I did, because I was at that International UFO Congress earlier this month, and I was next to a guy who's an animator for The Simpsons and some other people, and we were just looking around the room at one point, and I was like, hey, you're a lefty, I'm a lefty, she's a lefty. And the guy who were standing there talking was a lefty, and we were like, okay, what percentage of the population? And we were looking around, and I went, oh, he's holding a pen with a left hand. And there were so many people there who were left-handed that we were really wondering. So I did ask Kathleen if she'd included a handedness on her questionnaire, and she was like, well, no, I haven't, but she said she might in the future, because I said, well, I've certainly noticed, and I was pointing around, we were standing in a crowd right then. I said, look over there, he's left-handed. And I said, I know that I should look up. I actually didn't. I haven't looked up what population of what percentage of the population is left-handed, but I certainly found that unusual.
Right. Well, are are left-handed people unusual in general?
Yeah, I mean, we should Google that. Do you know what is the percentage of left-handed? How many people are left-handed? What percentage are left-handed here?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a curiosity, because you know what it is. We're always looking.
10%.
10%.
Okay.
So not very big.
No, it was certainly more than 10% at the UFO Congress. I got to say.
Right. Let's just say 40% of experiencers are left-handed. Then that would be telling, wouldn't it be?
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. She did say that one thing that would be, she mentioned that there was like a blood type that was slightly more common. Like 1/3 of them had the same blood type. I don't remember what the blood type was.
RH negative.
Was that it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Nick Redfern has talked about this a lot, which is
Okay.
that
Oh, Nick was great.
Yeah, it's something that is very unique and could have been spliced from a progenitor extraterrestrial origin. That's the idea. It sort of intervened in our evolution. So yeah.
So let's see, if you're left-handed and you're Rh negative, was it? Then woo, who knows?
Yep. What I do know is that it's not always easy or hasn't always been easy to do what you do and speak about it out in the open in everyday life. But I feel like times have changed. Do you feel any difference in society at large, how they perceive and receive the paranormal? I mean, do you feel more comfortable speaking openly about it with just anybody than, let's say, 20 years ago?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, way, way more. And I really seemed like, I don't know when, but maybe about the time taps came on. I'm not sure. But it just seems like it's slowly people have gotten more and more open to it. I've always kind of lived in towns where people were a little more open to it because I grew up in university towns. And I don't know what it is about university towns, but they're just, there's usually a metaphysical bookstore, and there's a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of people from all over the world living together, but in a lot of different cultures. So maybe that's it. But I have noticed just in the general population, it does seem to be getting way more mainstream, especially UFOs have really become more mainstream.
Yeah, it's part of pop culture, which is really great because even if some shows are more entertainment than reality, the fact that it's embedded in pop culture means it's growing and it's not going away, which is good, I think, for the community in the long run because we're keeping attention and eyes on it. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. This is our second and last break. We will be back with Tui Snider, and we have more to talk about, including cryptids, and we really haven't touched on the afterlife. A topic that I think all of us find fascinated because what happens once we're done with this ephemeral realm? Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. We'll be right back.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your host. The music for tonight's breaks is brought to you by Septembrio. If you want to find out more about their music, go to Septembrio with a Y, septembrio.com. All right, we have a lot to cover. And later this hour, we will open up the phone lines so that you can ask your questions directly to our guest, Tui Snider, by calling the Paranormal Radio app number, and that is 85-KGRA-LIVE. 855-472-5483. Listen to your cue. Pose your questions to the guest or myself. And again, make sure to save that number, 85-KGRA-LIVE. I will be looking forward to your questions. And cryptids. Let's see. Chewy, what of all the cryptids, which one fascinates you the most?
Oh, well,
I was going to tell you mine, but then I was like, no, let's hear yours first.
Well, I've got to say Mothman totally creeps me out. But having grown up in Washington State, I've got a soft spot for Bigfoot. So Sasquatch.
Okay. Is that now for me, I think a big influence, no pun intended, was Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh, yeah.
I loved that movie as a kid. I mean, it's still a great movie. And I think I like the idea that this cryptid is friendly, not
Yeah.
necessarily aggressive or scary, right?
Yeah, and I growing up, I never really heard tales of Sasquatch, at least up in my neck of the woods, being aggressive. But I heard of them being mischievous, and I always like kind of the mischief aspect. They might throw dirt clods at you, or just pull clothes off the laundry, things like that from people I'd heard. But when I see headlines about, I was attacked by a Bigfoot or something like that, that always makes me a little sad, and I always think, really? Because the ones I had heard about, I'd never heard of like mean Bigfoot before.
Yeah, I think the absolute worst I've heard are chickens, being stolen from the coop or something like that. Besides that, I mean, it's very rare. You will hear stories of a Bigfoot sort of not pounding its chest exactly, but intimidating someone. It's kind of scaring them off.
Yeah, which is a thing that primates do, and like a lot of animals. I think of a silverback gorilla or whatever. That seems fine. They can posture. Yeah. I don't mind. A lot of animals posture.
Yeah, if you're being chased out of the woods, but you come out unscathed, considering it's a Bigfoot, it probably didn't want to hurt you. It just wanted to get you out of the way. And we don't know if, these may be beings, right, that are beyond typical earthly biology, but assuming that they are mammalian or abide by the rules of nature in the animal kingdom, they may be protecting their young or offspring.
Yeah, maybe they're scared of us. So, we are kind of scary and unpredictable as a species. I wouldn't blame them for being a little frightened of us. But I should have said, now I'm feeling bad, I said Bigfoot, but I should make sure I give a shout out to the Lake Worth monster, because I live about 10 minutes away from Lake Worth. So
tell us about the Lake Worth monster.
Well, this is something that happened in the summer of 1969, so long before I came to this part of the world here in Texas. I've only been here 10 years, but I was so surprised when I think I was at a barbecue or something, and people were talking about the Lake Worth monster, and these were people who had lived here during the time, and it was a very divisive topic. People say that hey, I know one of the guys who dressed up as the Lake Worth monster, and at one point the monster like threw a tire at some people. That's one of the most infamous things that it did, which does sound like a kind of human thing to do. But there were, who knows? Maybe the original sighting was some sort of cryptid, and then other people were just trying to scare each other. That's another theory I've heard from people saying, yeah, the guy who threw the tire was a person, but I know the girl who saw the original one, and he was like, and a weird thing about this is one of those things where I say I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas because this isn't a Bigfoot creature. This thing is half man, half goat. So, like Pan is what I'm picturing. And I'm like, seriously? Yeah. But then what gets me is there are so many. How did I live this long and not know that there were so many goat men? So when you start doing research, like looking up goat creatures, it's not just the Lake Worth monster. There are like apparently a lot of sightings of some sort of goat-like thing. Now, I've never met someone personally, except this is the only one actually, goat people, like goat creatures, where I have met someone who claims that still it's a friend of a friend situation here, which are always a little suspect. But I met someone who claimed to be friends with the person who, saw the Lake Worth monster. So I don't know. What do you think about goat men?
Well, it kind of reminds me, I'm from New Jersey, so it reminds me of the Jersey Devil.
Yeah. And
the Jersey Devil was really, I think, is lore more than anything else. Personally, just having grown up there and heard the stories, the person who gave birth, last name was Leeds. It was her 13th birth, and this thing was totally deformed, and it perched on the. I remember after it was born, it like jumped to the windowsill, and then flew off into the night. It's really hard to believe.
Yeah.
When we were kids in the Pine Barrens, you always heard stories. Everybody, when you were kids, saw something or heard something, or you followed tracks in the woods. And looking back, it's easy for me to distinguish imagination versus what we actually did or did not saw. I remember one night, though, in particular, I was freaked out. Some older kids really had me convinced,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
was after dark, and I was so, yeah.
Well, I wonder, too, I mean, do you ever think about the Philip experiment and thought forms and how things that sort of man-made paranormal activity maybe could be related to some of the cryptid sightings that are in an area? Are you familiar with the Philip experiment at all? Or
The Philip experiment?
oh, this is so cool! I love it. You can look it up on YouTube later. It's in 1974 or somewhere around that time. There was a group of Canadian parapsychologists who wanted to do a paranormal experiment. They wanted to see if they met, I think, every week. I forget how often they met, but they had specific time and place. They were doing a scientific experiment. We are going to meet. We are going to create a backstory. They created a backstory for this guy named Philip who never existed, but they gave him very specific backstory of what he looked like, what had happened, this sort of love life he had, and the tragic life. And then they would meet, at specific times. They'd spend like an hour sitting around together trying to summon him and make him appear and do like a seance. Yeah. And so eventually...
And he did, right?
He did. He did, to the point where there is video of, they're on talk shows, and the table is, lifting off the ground and walking, and they're knocking sounds that can't be described. And they would do all sorts of things to try and make sure they weren't influencing it. I mean, they knew that they were, because they had created this thought form. There really was no Philip, but they had made him up. But what was weird was he would then perform to their expectations. He would act his personality. He would answer questions as though that went along with their storyline. And so to me, that really I think that's fascinating. And it just turns a lot of paranormal research on its head. So you think you're making contact with your Aunt Madge, but are you just having an elaborate Philip experiment? And besides, I mean, just to have the power of our psyche to think that we could do that anyway, make things move and knocking, and what is it we're tapping into? I find it pretty fascinating.
Have you had a chance to speak with Nick Redfern about the Slender Man?
Oh, no, but I would love to.
His speculation is that the Slender Man could be something like that.
Yeah.
Because it started just as someone's creative idea on Reddit and then expanded there. People were building on this lore. You had possibly hundreds of thousands of people thinking about this thing. And the danger of possibly incarnating imaginary something.
Yeah. Well, it's like on Harry Potter, no one wants to say Voldemort's name. It's sort of like you can understand maybe there's a reason for, not saying the name. They always say don't say the name of this bad person or this bad entity. Maybe that is to avoid creating it as a thought form.
Because it's almost like an incantation.
Yeah. Beetlejuice.
Okay, so see, now I think fear is very powerful, so I might be able to think this more because it could come from a place of fear.
Yeah.
Versus why doesn't Santa Claus exist?
Oh, I was just going to say Santa Claus. There are a lot of kids who have Santa Claus sightings. I actually, when I was a kid, I had a Sandman sighting. I was like 8 or 9. Yeah, it was so funny. I was like 8 or 9, and I was the first time I'd ever had insomnia, really had insomnia, and I was just like, what is going on? I was so upset, and so I sat up in bed and I started singing, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream, and I was singing that, and hoping that maybe that would happen. And I was thinking, gosh, I wish the Sandman would come. Where's the Sandman? All of a sudden, this glowing orange man walks into my room. He was wearing a really tacky suit, all these gaudy colors, and he was glowing. He was sort of like something out of Hanna-Barbera, and he comes and he had a sack over his back, and he looked at me, and he reached in and he just threw some dust at me. And then the next thing I knew, it was the morning, and I woke up and I thought, oh, and then I felt some grains of sand in my bed, and so I freaked out.
Gosh, wow.
But you know what? Then I told my friend at school. She came home, and I was reenacting the whole thing. And then we discovered that my little stuffed dog had kind of leaked, and it had some sawdust in it. And so that's what was. So we debunked it. But my Sandman sighting was pretty fun.
A friend of the family, Tom Turner, the author, had written a book called The Sandman. So that's interested in some good fiction. That's a good read.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we are going to take our first call. Are you ready?
Woohoo!
Okay, great. So we've got Daniel from Irving, Texas. Daniel, you're on the air.
I can barely hear you. Hello?
Hi, Daniel. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, but not too well, but I can hear you.
Okay, well, welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Tui?
I just wanted to tell her I've been followed by aliens all my life. I've seen Bigfoot. I have pictures, lots of them. And
wow,
my health is bad, so now I'm getting my pictures out, and I have a website, boogiefoot.com, that I put a few pictures on there. And I have hundreds of stories of things that have happened to me in my life. And most people don't believe it, you know, but it is what it is, and it's time for me to get my information out.
What was the name of that website again? I didn't quite hear it.
Boogiefoot.com, BOOGEYFOOT.
Oh, okay. Boogiefoot.com. Well, thank you.
Well, Daniel, do you think there's a reason? Do you suspect any reason why you have so many experiences?
Well, they've been following me all my life, and I think it's now because they want me to get this information out. The strongest contacts I have had were before and after both of my heart surgeries. Before my first one, they called me to the forest and checked me out. After my surgery, they called me to the forest and checked me out. They did the same for my second one, but I wasn't able to leave the house the second time. They actually lifted me up with my recliner and did whatever they did.
Wait, you said they lifted you with your recliner?
Yes, they lifted me right into my recliner up, and I could even see myself going up. I even reached over and touched one's arm that was holding me. They've been revealing themselves more and more to me. They let me take pictures of them, and it's they're like a interdimensional thing going on at the same time.
And is this in Texas?
Huh?
Is this in Texas that you're seeing them?
Yeah, I've seen them. It doesn't matter where.
Okay.
They get me wherever. You know.
Daniel, when you touched its arm, what did it feel like?
Right when I did that, it kind of all ended. It was at the end. It was more like a thank you. I wanted to touch them, and then they were done with what they were doing. I don't know what they're doing. I don't remember anything on a ship or anything. That's all blank.
Well, do you, after these experiences, or even now, do you feel like, are they traumatic experiences, negative, or are they positive for you?
I've been through all the changes. When they first revealed themselves to me, it was with Bigfoots. When I realized Bigfoot was with them, they're not living in the forest like people think. The ones I saw were well groomed, well taken care of. And at the time, I blacked out. I blacked it out. I stayed with them for 3 days up in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. I was the only one around, and it was several years later when it all started coming back to me, and it was hard to talk about. I was shaking. I wanted to go kill them. I was getting my rounds for my shotgun. I was going to take a trip. I was going to go hunt them, and all that has changed the more they come and reveal themselves to me, and they come in all different looks, all different sizes. It's really amazing. A lot of them use a white makeup and black makeup or something, and they camouflage themselves with like raccoons, and if you look at my website, I got a picture of one. He was just checking me out. I see him a lot. I think he's the one I touched his arm. He's just out with his right hand on the tree, his left hand, and he's just watching me and letting me take his picture.
Well, it's interesting you make that comment about a raccoon. I know that many people claim that they believe aliens will sort of project into the minds of another person that they are an owl or something like that. Do you think it could have been a similar thing, or do you think they really were just wearing makeup?
No. The aliens I've seen, it looks like some of them can breathe our oxygen and some of them are in some type of outfit. But they're all different, and actually they hang out in a group of all different kinds. I have a picture of one. It's so cool. He's holding like a golden light rod or something, like a light rod, and he's off in the trees with his legs crossed, and he's looking at me. My pit bull dog is down below him in a green bubble, looking up at him, growling. They subdued him, and I was around them for a day and a half at that time, and then some more people came into the area shooting guns and hunting grouse, and they took off. I got a picture of two black, like egg-shaped rocks they wanted me to take, and I didn't take them, and I feel so bad for not taking them. They wanted me to take them. They kept moving them down the picnic table, like take them. I picked them up and, looked at them and stuff, and I put them back down, and now I regret it so bad. I should have done it.
Daniel, I couldn't hear you. What were you picking up?
They wanted me to take two black egg-shaped rocks.
I see.
They put them on the picnic table for me. And when I wouldn't take them, I picked them up and I looked at them. I put them back down. They kept moving them along down the picnic table. Like take them, and I didn't take them. And I don't know why I didn't take them. I guess at the time, I don't know. I regret it now, though.
Well, Daniel, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. There's a lot to unpack there. And before we let you go, do you have a question for Tui at all in regard to this?
No, I'd like to talk to her sometime, maybe show her some of my pictures.
All right. Well, Tui, how does anyone send you email or contact you? What's the best way to do that?
Just go to my website. You can sign up for my newsletter, or you can just email me at tuisnider@gmail.com. So, but yeah, I try to make my website, tuisnider.com, kind of the hub for everything that I'm doing. So that's a good way to get a hold of me.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for calling in, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Yeah, check out his site.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, have a good night. So, Tui, what did you take away from that? Was there anything that you heard that resonates with you with some of the investigations you've undertaken?
Well, just the fact that he said that this had followed him his whole life, that is something that I've heard from a lot of people, that if they've experienced something, it's not like they even have to go seek it out. It's going to seek them out. And the fact that the kind of repressed memories things too. I've come across people who have had pretty intense experiences and then more or less forgotten it or repressed it. I mean, it sounded like that Daniel was having some PTSD. I mean, he said he would be shaking and really having some issues with what he was remembering. And then, him wanting to go shoot it, and then how his feelings had changed. I found that really quite interesting.
Right. We talked about that a lot on the show. Free, in their study, I think it was 87% of contactees or experiencers over time will start off with a negative experience or neutral. And then over time, they either reinterpret their experiences or have more experiences and land in a space where they feel like it's all for a positive purpose.
I have seen that a lot. And yeah, even you think famous people too along the way. I think that is kind of a theme if you follow Whitley Strieber or even
like
Travis Walton. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was to say I met Terry Terry Lovelace. He's I met him recently, and he certainly has kind of run the gamut of emotions from feeling scared and violated, and then realizing too, he knew he'd had some experiences as an adult, but then when he really began examining them, and I don't mean like going through hypnosis or anything, having to do that, but really looking back and talking to people, he realized it had been going on his whole life. So that seems to be something that happens for people a lot.
Right. And that begs the question again, right? We're looking for these patterns, left-handed people, RH negative. What is it that brings people to this experience? And that still really is a huge enigma, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't think we know. I think we keep finding more and more information, but do we have answers? I don't think we have definitive answers yet. I'm glad we're still looking, though. There's really a lot of dots to connect.
Well, have you had any paranormal experiences yourself, including any kind of contact experience that altered your outlook on life or maybe yourself spiritually?
Yeah, I've had a lot of things happen throughout my life, and I'd always kept them very close to the vest. I never, partly because some of them were very precious memories to me. Others, they were just too hard to describe. Like I had said before, being the youngest, I've had a lot of experiences with nature, which like nature entities, for lack of a better word, and I don't hear about that as much. I do sometimes hear people in the paranormal community or like on a TV show, and they'll suddenly say, "Oh, elementals," and they talk about them as if they're some sort of negative being. And I really bristle at that, because all of my experiences that I've had throughout my life, and I can share some with Mother Nature, or whatever you want to call it, with nature consciousness, has been really beautiful, and nothing evil at all about it. I mean, that would be the last thing. So I really do bristle when I hear people say that. I know that when people are scared, the first thing they want to do is call something an entity. But I had a really neat experience when I was a kid. I was 11 or 12, and my family was having a picnic, and it was a bunch of adults. I was the only kid, really, and I thought it was kind of boring, and so I asked if I could go wander off, and they were like, "Sure, go have a walk. You got to be back before dark, and we'll help out with the picnic." So I wandered off, and I climbed a tree. I loved climbing trees as a kid, and I climbed way up in some sort of pine tree. It was kind of sticky because I was getting pitch on me, but it was a really good view. I was up there, and all of a sudden I could hear something moving below. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, is that a deer?" And then it sounded bigger and bigger to me. And I started to get scared. I thought maybe there are cougar around there, and cougar could climb, and there's bears, and bears could climb trees. I started to feel a little vulnerable and scared. And it was getting closer and closer. It was just moving through the brush. And it got to the bottom of the tree, and it came up. And what it was, and this is so hard to describe, it was the wind. And it was like a little breeze moving by itself, this wind, and it came up. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Abyss.
Yeah. Oh.
But this really, there's a part in The Abyss where the water comes out, and it's like this clear thing that you can see through, but it's still the water entity. It was kind of like that, not quite as palpable, but it was definitely, I could see the wind. I could see and it was so weird. The wind came up, and it got up about face level with me, and I'm just clinging to the tree like, what is going on? And the wind, it stops kind of in front of me, and I felt this feeling of like affection, and sort of like it was patting me on the head, kind of like, "Oh, it's just a little human, just one of those it's a little one kind of feeling, like, "Oh, look at what fancy finding you here." And
so
then it just disappeared.
When you're looking at it, it looked like the way the water creatures kind of looked like.
There wasn't a face, but I could see that it was, the air looked different there. And it was like a tube, sort of. And it had consciousness. I knew that there was some consciousness in front of me. That's what flipped me out. And I'm like, okay. And so I, climbed down the tree after a few minutes, and I went, and I remember asking my dad, I'm like, "Hey, Dad, is it ever possible to see the wind?" And I'm trying to, and he was like, "Can you?" And they were like, "Well, when on a hot day, you might be able to see sort of the heat waves coming off the ground." And I'm like, "Yeah." But I just was like, I knew there was something more to it. And so I just was like, I'm tucking that memory away into the mystery box, as we're going to call it now. And I will try and figure that out. So that was.
I suspect if it was a heat wave, then you would feel the heat.
Yeah.
You would have felt the change in temperature like that.
And what got me was there was palpable consciousness that I could feel. And I've had that experience a few other times in nature. And it's just weird when you could feel consciousness next to you. I think that's my theory for why sometimes, and this is a common occurrence everyone's had, I think, where you feel like you're being looked at, you feel like you're being watched.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you're picking up at some point. I mean, not in every case. Maybe someone's actually looking at you. But I mean, I think that is a hallmark of being in the presence of another consciousness. I think we can feel other consciousness. And so to us, and if it's observing us, then we feel looked at. But that really was the first time I remember really seeing something that made no sense. It can't say that it scared me. I was scared especially when I thought it might be a cougar or a bear. But then I was just more kind of, I don't know. I was really just, what just happened?
Is that what we would call an elemental?
I think that might have been the wind elemental, yeah. And I've had something happen too where I've seen fire elemental, and then I had kind of an interesting water elemental experience. So, yeah, I've had some experiences with nature before.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to take another call from Ronald from Minnesota. Ronald, you're on the air.
Hey,
Ronald,
how you doing, Alan?
Good. How are you?
I'm here. It works. I'm not sure about
Ron, I was
Skype
about
call,
to
anyway.
read your question from the chat room. So
go ahead and ask it.
Ahead and, yeah.
Oh, you want me to ask it?
Oh, ask whatever you want to ask. Sure.
Oh, well, I had another question, but you can go and ask that question from what I had in chat. Go ahead and ask that, and I'll ask my question right after.
Sure. Well, let's team up. Okay, so Tui, the first question that Ron had was, can certain music activate UFO sightings or paranormal activity?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know of any, but I'm not saying that it wouldn't. I'm a musician, and I do feel at times when I'm playing music that it puts me into an altered state. And I don't think that's anything weird. I think a lot of musicians can say that, and certain types of music are really spacey and meditative. And I think if you had me hooked up to a biofeedback machine, you'd see that I was having a lot more alpha waves all of a sudden. I can feel it. There's certainly a power to music. I have asthma, and there's been times I used to play in a little orchestra, and I would be, having an asthma attack. I'd go to the rehearsal. I'd leave rehearsal and realize I felt great and my asthma was gone. So I think there is certainly a power to music, and I think there is something as well to the emotions that it stirs, because with a lot of paranormal activity, it's often linked to ballrooms and places where they used to play music, and people will still hear the music. Now, as far as attracting a UFO, I don't know. It certainly seems possible. If you know of anything, let me know. I think that's a really interesting idea.
Good answer. Good answer. Now, on left-handed people, I was ambidextrous when I was in grade school, and that was I was just really weird because I could write with both hands. Usually not good on any hand, but I could write with both hands, and they would make me choose a hand. And then they were telling me, back in the mid-'60s, they told me that left-handed people were of the devil, okay? And they would actually wrap my knuckles with the oak stick, on a desk, smash my knuckles, with the solid oak stick, and try to make me choose the right hand. Well, I said, forget it then. If I'm going to be anything, I'm going to be left-handed, and I'll be from the devil then, that's the way I thought, And so this is in public school that they told us this, interesting. In California, of course, so there you go.
I know some other people who have had similar experiences being told not to use their left hand. I mean, the word sinister actually is, sinistra means left, I think, in Latin in Latin. And that's where we get the word sinister.
the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, who had written so many books of the New Testament, he was, I believe, left-handed, if I remember right.
Oh, really?
So, I think so.
Wow.
And then there were the 700 left-handed horsemen that were in the Old Testament story. If you remember that story.
Huh. No.
And the thing that won the thing that won the battle was that they were left-handed, and it really kind of threw everybody off. Like, wait a minute, they're coming at us from the wrong side. So,
yeah, see?
So it could really confuse the issue. But yeah, so I'm still ambidextrous in many things. You know, writing is not one of the things that I do well with my right hand, but I can still write with my right hand, but not very well. But I can throw and I can catch with my right hand. I can throw and catch with my left. You know, things like that. You know, and so
yeah.
I think it's a gift and a talent that I wish that in those days they wouldn't have, you know, caused anyone to you know, not use their gift, you know, 'cause that could have been a little bit more of the expression-wise type of gift that someone could use and actually excel in many different things, I believe, you know, if you have that ability. And so when you're told not to use a certain gift, you lose out on the ability to express the gift that you have. I don't know if I made any sense or not. But anyway, yeah, so now, do you think that the left-handed people or ambidextrous people are special, like we're from somewhere else, or that we were implanted with something, or is there any kind of connection with another race that we don't know about? I don't know. I'm just curious about that as well. But I'll take the answer off the phone, and I'll let you guys get back to your calls. And thank you for the phone call, and appreciate your show. And thank you, Ellen, for a great show. And Bill Skywatcher, thank you for the phone call. All right? We'll talk to you guys
Thanks, Ron. I really appreciate it. Okay. Have a good night.
Bye.
So,
yeah.
Julie, what's your take?
Well, I just think it's sad when anyone has been forced to use a different hand. Yeah, that is just wrong. But I have met a lot of people who have been forced to switch their hands, especially, you know, I don't think they do that so much anymore, but it's usually people in private schools or whatever. Yeah, I just think that's a sad, outdated thing. I will say that as someone who does a lot of things left-handed, I do use my computer right-handed, and I make a conscious choice. I do a lot of, like you mentioned, being ambidextrous. I do a lot of things with my right hand, so it's really nice for research because I can be using the mouse with my right hand, but I can be writing notes, physical notes with my left hand, and so I find it really, and I can have a book open, and so like, or a website, be taking notes on the website, and I don't have to put the mouse down and then write. So for me, you know, being a little bit mixed, I just figure when the world, you know, I play guitar, I play it right-handed because I figure, oh, you know, why not? What difference does it make to me? I don't feel the urge to play it left-handed, or and, you know, most things in the world are going to be right-handed. So if it's an item that I'm going to be encountering, I don't want to always have to have especially one that's left-handed. As far as, you know, being special or whatever, I really don't know. I'm trying to remember, though. I saw some science. Maybe someone in the chat room has seen this article. There was an article recently about, it was either like cats or dogs or some animal that they were surprised to find that a lot of them were left-pawed, because there are left and right paws in animals. And then there was also something, I think, it was like they've handed this in some sort of animal it was determined by some sort of environmental things, like maybe temperature. I don't remember now. You know, it's just one of those little articles that I saw in passing, and now I wish I'd paid a little more attention to it. What do you think, Alan?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think there's enough for me to work with to make a decision. But I do have to say, I got a message, and I was thinking about this myself earlier when Daniel was telling his story. The caller Daniel, he had mentioned Bigfoot being well groomed, and that being evidence, right? of
yeah,
him not being a wild creature.
that did. He said, "Well taken care of." I know that kind of stuck out in my head too. Like something was taking care of the Bigfoot. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. Well, do you think that is a plausible theory that perhaps Bigfoot is an alien or in partnership of some sort with aliens and is just dropped off? It goes around as this thing and then takes off again?
I have no idea, but that's certainly an interesting take on it. I had never thought of that. I had always thought of Bigfoot as living in their own little Bigfoot community, whatever it might be. If it is interdimensional, I don't know. But I hadn't thought of them maybe being living the way we have animals live with us. I have a cat living with me and a fish and crab and turtle. I don't know. Maybe they are. That is an interesting thing. I hadn't heard of that before.
So
I think it was kangaroos that are left-handed.
Yes, they are.
That's it. I knew there was some animal. Okay, thanks. It was going to bug me until I remembered what it was.
Right, which makes them feel very special.
Yes, they're even cooler.
So what was your other experience with an elemental?
This one. Yeah. Okay, this is all. How much time do we have? Okay, I won't try not to ramble too much. I don't talk about these a lot because, like I said, to me, they're sort of precious experiences. Actually, I can think of two. I'll make one short, and then I've got one about a tree, and then a little longer one about a water sprite. So the tree experience was I went to a weekend meditation retreat, meditation thing where we would have meals together, and then we were doing all these different meditations. And they're being led like, okay, we're doing this meditation, we're chanting this, we're doing that. And I wasn't really sure what. It was the first time I'd really gone to anything like that. And actually, I've only been to one other meditation thing, and we didn't go as deep. But at one point, I remember I went to use the bathroom, and I was washing my hands, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I noticed my pupils were really dilated. I thought, wow, something's happening here. I didn't feel like I was in some sort of trance, but I was really, I guess, getting into some sort of deep state. So we went back, and then the person leading it said, okay, I want you to go out and kind of communion with nature for 20 minutes and then come back. And so I went out and I climbed a tree.
Because you like climbing trees.
I do.
I did too when I was a kid. They actually called me Monkey Boy when I was a kid.
Yeah, cool. I love that. So the joy of tree climbing. There's just nothing like it. Well, this was a cedar tree, and how they smell so nice. I climbed up the cedar tree, and I was sitting there, and I'm leaning back. It was a very comfortable tree. Like you could sit in the branches, and it was not. You didn't feel like you were going to fall out. It was like sitting in an easy chair. I was like, I was pretty high up. I had a view. I'm like, man, this is great. And I said out loud, I'm like, wow, cedar, I noticed that there were, I saw like an inchworm, and I saw ants, and then I saw a bird nest, and then I saw another bird, and I noticed squirrels, all these animals, and I were like, wow, you're like a city, I said, wow, cedar tree, you've got a lot of life on you, something like that. I said something out loud, and I heard in my head, it wasn't like I heard it out loud, but I heard something, I felt this energy first off, and it was like very parental, and it was like fatherly. Just this tremendous love, like it nearly brought tears to my eyes. It was like palpable love and consciousness. And then it said to me, well, when you live up to your true potential, you provide shelter for many beings. Something like that. I wrote down exactly what it said later, but it was along those lines. And if you live up to your potential, you create such a, I think it's really wise words. I had never thought of that before. So to me, that was really neat. I was like, wow, if I ever manage to live up to my potential, I will be helping everyone else. I had never thought of it in that regard. Yeah. So that was my big tree thing. So then my other big weird experience was, there's a couple more, but I'll tell you about the water sprite one. Sure. I used to have a coffee house in my 20s. I ran a coffee house, and it was a lot of fun. And I had a lot of really quirky regulars who would come in. It's like your chat room. It's all your buddies. You see them every day. You get to know them, and we would talk about all sorts of things that were happening, and some of the people who would come were poets, some were psychics, some were this, some were that. This one lady who would come, she was half Native American and half Scottish, and she believed in the little people. And she would always tell me that I was somehow had a lot of elemental energy around me, and that you have fairy energy around you, you have little people energy around you. It was fun. I just took it with a grain of salt. I didn't think much about it. But one day she shows up, and I think it was summer solstice. It was something like that, spring equinox or summer solstice. It was one of those. And she asked if I could leave the coffee house for a few minutes. I found someone to make espresso for a little bit, and so I could leave for like half an hour. She goes, "You have to come down to the waterfront. You have to on this special day." I think it was equinox. Anyway, so we went down to the docks, and we went down to the water. This was up in Washington State along Puget Sound. And she said, "Well, okay, here we are. You need to talk to the fairies." She just points to me, and we have 4 or 5 people with us. And I'm like, "Really? Okay." And so I'm like, "Well, hi, fairies, hi, water sprites." And she said, "Okay, well, now you have to give them a gift." And I'm like, "A gift?" So I took off the bracelet I had, and I threw it in the water. And she said, "Well, what do you want in return?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." I had no idea she was going to do all this, so I hadn't prepared anything. And I said, "Oh, I don't know. Life's been a little boring lately. Maybe you could give me a little mischief." In retrospect, as you can see, as we all know, was that kind of a stupid thing to ask for? Yeah. So I go back to my coffee house, and it ended up being a really busy night, and I quickly forgot about the whole thing. I did write about it, of course, in my diary, but still, I kind of, didn't think about it every day. I wasn't going, "Oh, what's going to happen?" Ooh, oh. So I don't know, a week or so later, it's a really busy night, and I'm feeling a little crestfallen. My sister had just visited, and I was missing her, and so my chef had left, and he'd left me a mountain of dishes, so I knew I was going to be there late doing dishes. And a friend had offered to help me wash dishes, so she's handing me, when you have a restaurant, you have to have the water, the sudsy water, and then the rinsed water, and then the bleach water. You have got to have 3 sinks to do it. And so she's, we had our rubber gloves on, and she's handing me dishes. And so at one point, she's handing me a plate, and I can see her hand. She can see my hand. And all our hands, all 4 hands are accounted for. And yet, I was wearing a pink beret at the time. I think it's the one I have in my Skype photo, in fact. And something lifted the pink beret up on my head and then just dropped it. And I heard the word mischief in my head. And then, oh my gosh, it felt like soap. There was so much prickly, sparkly energy around me. I turned around. There was a white cloud around me, a little taller than me, that anybody could see. In fact, my friend, and I go to her, "Did you just touch my hat?" She's like, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "Look there." And I turn around and I look, and she goes, "What's going on? It's all smoky." And so I ran out, and I just grabbed 2 random people who I knew didn't believe in anything woo-woo. And I brought them back. I said, "Do you guys see anything back here?" And one of them goes, why is it so, what's this mist? There was like a mist in the air there. And the other one thought, "Is your refrigerator, is it leaking Freon?" The refrigerator was across the room. It was fine. But it was a really weird experience. And for the next while there, so much mischievous things would happen around there. It was fun mischief, though. Like, I would be talking, and then suddenly, like, my bracelet would like fly across the room. Or there was a cop who would come in and always kind of harass me, and he would think people were tapping him on the shoulder and stuff, and no one was standing there. I think it was like this mischievous entity. So it was very strange. A lot of weird things happened after that. So that was a real eye opener for me. Also, be careful what you wish for. Why didn't I say a pot of gold? No, mischief. Oh well.
I should have gotten a pot of gold, though, to be honest.
I know.
But I think that's interesting because I don't understand how this works. But assuming that it does, if you put an intention out there or you ask for something to happen, it seems to me that it doesn't occur literally most of the time. Yeah. If you want something for yourself, it's not exactly what you would expect. If you ask for more money, you're not going to suddenly become a millionaire. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there really is a sort of intention that you put out there and return, or do you think that there are intelligences like elementals that are listening to us and respond?
Oh my gosh, I have the weirdest story that I don't think that I never tell anyone, because it's so on one level, it's so underwhelming, and on another level, it is so freaky. Okay, this happened when I was living in Belgium, and I rented an apartment because you just triggered it here with what you were asking. So I rented an apartment, and I moved to Belgium. I didn't bring any of my own stuff. It was like a fully furnished place with a kitchen. It had forks and knives, and it had a spatula. Every morning I would make myself eggs, and I would use this spatula. It was like melamine or something, and it was white, and it was slightly dingy brown from being slightly burned. And every morning when I'd make my eggs, I would think, this is a pretty nice spatula, but I wish it were black. Because I didn't like the sort of dingy white. It's not like I have some great thing about having sparkling, cutlery and kitchenware, but for whatever reason, that would go through my head. I don't know how many days in a row I would think, like, gosh, I'd like this spatula better if it were black. And it just would go through my head. It was like I obsessed over it. It was just a morning thought, Then I'd be on to I'm making toast now. I'm doing this, having coffee. And then I'd be like, because you stand there, you wait for your egg. You have a little bit of time. So I'd be gazing. And I think, gosh, I kind of wish this were a black spatula. It wouldn't show that brown so much. All right. One day, I open one morning. I'm getting ready. I crack the eggs. I have the skillet going. I open the drawer, and there is a black spatula. I kid you not. Exactly like I'd been wishing for. Once again, why did I not wish for a pot of gold? I was every morning if I'd known. I don't know what that was, but it freaked me out to no end. I tore the kitchen apart. I pulled the drawer out. I tried to figure it out, but it was exactly where I would tuck the white spatula every day. And the fact that I'd never said this out loud to anybody else, I knew that it wasn't somehow a friend had swapped the spatula when I was at work or the landlady or something. It was just weird. That was the only thing that changed. And it was just, on the one hand, like I said, you can't make a Hollywood movie out of ooh, that her spatula changed color. But on the other hand, when you're the receiving end of your spatula changing from white to black, well, it's a pretty crazy experience.
That is very specific, first of all. And you're right. So I guess in that case, if you can request a black spatula, why not request? But again, this wasn't a request necessarily, right? You weren't consciously thinking, oh, so-and-so, I want whatever.
Yes, great kitchen god in the sky, oh, an artist, the grand. No.
Yeah, you weren't praying to the Panhandle Star constellation.
No.
Yeah,
No.
So it's a wonder. It seems almost like there are limitations on what you can ask for, and it's a little bit out of our control, and maybe there's a reason for that, right? If it's possible that some things can be manifested, it's probably
what gets me is something heard me. You know what I mean?
It's probably
you think your little thoughts are so private.
Right. But imagine billions of people having their desires instantly come true. That would be madness.
Oh yeah, that would be nuts.
So it seems like there are some rules built into reality to regulate that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can see that.
There is a picture on your Amazon page of you reading a book to an alien statue. And I just want to say that is it looks so real. The alien really looks intent on that book that you're holding. Right.
Well, he was riveted. He's not from around here. He needed a lot of help. I was telling him about the alien grave, and maybe it's a relative of yours. You should show up, and maybe if you show up, they'll exhume it. That was actually that little statue. The MUFON man owned that statue, and everybody was having such a good time posing with that thing.
It's great because it does look so inquisitive. It has for all black eyes, it has a very clear expression. So next week our guest is Brian Forrester. And so we'll be discussing the Paracas skulls in Peru.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen any evidence to suggest that these skulls are not just altered, that they may in fact be non-human or human hybrid?
I hardly feel qualified. I'm fascinated by that. I am. I really don't know. I think, though, that one thing that blows me away is that, growing up, you think, oh, well, everything's been discovered. There's no more civilizations to be discovered. There's no more, tribes or anything. There's no more archaeological things to be discovered, and yet we are constantly discovering new things, like with drones and even Google Earth. I mean, amateurs are able to make these discoveries. So to me, I don't know, it's possible, and I think maybe they need to have some more discoveries, and I'm sure they will, because it's just, look at the pace we're going at. You know what I'm saying? Like, I thought that, everything has been found. It just seems like it's accelerated and we're finding more.
No, it's expanding our understanding of our history. It's like it just keeps getting bigger, bigger, and longer.
Yeah.
And headboarding or any kind of body modification has been going around for a long time throughout human history. Some of the earliest findings of humans that are, caught in bog or the Iceman have had tattoos on them. And I wonder, as a conscious sentient being, if we're so interested in that sort of body modification and experimenting with our own selves, I can only imagine what another sentient being or beings out there might be willing to do to us.
Yeah. Ooh. That's kind of.
Wonder if it's a consciousness thing, a self-awareness thing, experimenting on oneself and others.
Yeah, I don't know. You made me kind of go, and I'm thinking this, I'm mulling this over. I'm not sure. I'm really not. It is certainly something that culturally you see across the board. We do try to modify ourselves. Even now, there's the modifications we're doing where, in kind of becoming cyborgs in some manner, the type of wetware and things that we're adding. We're curious to see what we'll be doing like 30 years from now. So it does make me wonder, like with an advanced civilization, what sort of things they may have done. And just consciousness, really, beyond the biology, to me, what can we do with our consciousness is my ultimate fascination. If my consciousness was able to somehow conjure a black spatula, and people were able to conjure the Philip experiment, and perhaps how much of this are the anomalies are we creating in some level, and why? What's the purpose of that?
Are we actually creating the aliens too themselves? We didn't get a chance to talk about the afterlife, so you have just 1 minute. In 1 minute, what would you tell us about the afterlife? What do you think is to come?
I don't know. I'm in no hurry to find out. I've got to say it. I'm being totally honest. I am not in a hurry. I will say that there was one haunted location that I was going to be visiting, and the night before I went there, I had the weirdest dream, and I know everyone says they've had the weirdest dream, but it was a difficult dream to explain. I felt like I was in this blackness. It was very intense. It was very vivid. All I could say was I felt like I knew what it was like to be a ghost, like to be stuck in some sort of void and attempting to communicate with the world. And when I finally was able to come out of that dream and wake up, I was so happy and relieved to be alive. And then when I went to this haunted location, the first thing that the person who lived there said was, "So did the house contact anyone last night? It often contacts people." And I didn't say anything because I just could not even explain that dream, but I did wonder. It gave me a different feeling. It was a bit like that Nicole Kidman movie, The Others, except it was very spooky, the dream vision thing I had, because I woke up during it too. Yeah. So
those experiences can make it all seem so real. Tui, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me, Alan. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to find out more about Tui Snider, go to TuiSnider.com, TuiSnider.com. And that's it, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Next week, we have Brian Forrester on in the second hour. In the first hour, for all of my Star Wars and sci-fi geek fans out there, yes, we're bringing Mac Barnes back on the show to talk about the upcoming Star Wars film, the final film, apparently, in the Skywalker saga. So hopefully you'll stick around, stay tuned with us, geek out with us, and then hang the second hour for Brian Forrester. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA every Tuesday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And don't forget, we are really close, really, really close to getting 100 subscriptions on Paranormal Pop. So if you go to YouTube, Paranormal Pop, Alan B. Smith, punch all that in, The page will pop up. Subscribe, support. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. And special thanks to KGRA producer Bill Skywatcher. Until next time, live in the mystery.